Yeah. Do you want to go first in maybe, and then we'll go around everybody else?
Okay, right. Thank you, Jake. I'm Ian Roddick, Director of the Schumacher Institute, and I'll talk a little bit more about that just in a minute or two with the presentation. Thanks. Over to Gareth, maybe. Yeah.
Gareth Cunningham. I am Head of Conservation for Wales, so basically head of our Wales team for the Marine Conservation Society. Slide pass on to who's next on my screen, Jake.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm Jake Elster-Jones. So many of you know me, but maybe not all of you. I'm an independent researcher. I've been working for the last 5 years or so with the Montgomeryshire Wildlife Trust Pimlinon project, which has led us to this point, led me to this point, something or us to this point. So yeah, trying to grapple with this challenge of how to get farmers funding and money, how to make farm businesses work when farmers are doing stuff which makes sense for ecosystems at the landscape level, as well as for farm businesses and communities. So yeah, that's what I'm up to at the moment.
Should I go next, Jake? Since I'm involved with the Pimlinon project, Barbara Sanderson, I work for a UK charity called Pure Leapfrog. We manage the British Airways Carbon Fund, which is the donations made by BA passengers, and we're delighted to be able to support the Pimlinon project through the Carbon Fund. The charity itself is involved in accelerating net zero transition on a local basis, and we do this through energy systems, nature-based solutions, and also involving kind of carbon markets more broadly in that. I'm delighted to be here. Shall I pass over to Rachel, maybe speed up the introduction process?
Hi, I'm Rachel Sharp. I'm the Director of Wildlife Trust Wales, representing the 5 wildlife trusts throughout Wales, also being part of the innovative financing group that Alice set up, and also the Blue Carbon group that Gareth chairs. And I'll hand over to Alice.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning. I'm Alice Teague. I'm a Deputy Director in Welsh Government. I've got responsibility for biodiversity and also the marine environment. And as Rachel's mentioned, we've got a group at the moment that's looking at sustainable finance, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. I'll pass on to Karen.
So I should have been more ready. Karen LaRue, Welsh Government. I'm in Alice's team. I'm head of marine resilience. So there's a couple of things.
I don't know if I can't hear your microphone actually. I don't know if anybody else can.
I've got a problem. That helps? Good. That doesn't help me here, but apparently it helps you hear me. So that's interesting. So I am in Alice's team, Head of Marine Resilience, Welsh Government. I lead our Coast and Seas Partnership, which is looking at sustainable investment, which Gareth is leading on. And I've also been looking at systems thinking for blue economy within our division also quite recently. So I'm quite interested in the links here. Thanks. I will hand over to Gwaur.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Gwaur Parry. I'm a county advisor for Clwyd and Montgomeryshire with NFU Cymru.
Lovely, thank you, everybody. The plan is that I'll now take you through a sort of an overview of systems thinking and things like that. I've got a PowerPoint presentation and I tend to overdo this, so I shall try to go as fast as possible. But if hopefully won't be too long. So if you just bear with me a minute, I'll share my screen, and hopefully this will work. Right. Is that visible? Okay, thanks, lovely. So yes, it's thinking systemically about natural resource management and funding, I think, is what I'm about. And my role in this is to do a lot of listening. quite honestly, I don't know a great deal about the subjects that you know a lot about. So part of the issue with coming in and helping with systems thinking is this problem of actually trying to find out what's going on and what everything is about. A little bit about the Schumacher Institute. We are a fellowship organization, and we grew out of the work of E.F. Schumacher, author of Small is Beautiful, which is nearly 50 years old. We're having an anniversary next year to celebrate that. Our main role is to promote system sciences for environmental and social justice. We've got about 207 at latest count fellows dotted around the world, working in many, many different fields. So that's how we do it. And our whole idea is to sort of, as I say, get systems thinking used wherever we possibly can. So from what I know from Jake's in contact with me and talking about this, is the real question is how do we integrate the sort of emergent funding opportunities for sustainable management of natural resources in Wales, and how can those resource streams work together, and how can we avoid unintended pitfalls? So that's the sort of early background to what we're about, and I've got the word perceived there because that's how it comes out to start with. So the whole point with the systems thinking is to try to delve deeper into some of these things. So today is the objective to explore the potential for systems thinking, to gain some insights and learn about some of the tools of the trade, you might call it, and to prepare ourselves for some initial systems mapping and systems thinking exercises in the next two workshops. Part of that is to develop some kind of initial rich picture of the systems in play, which we can start potentially on that route today. So the issues, and really I copied this out from what Jake sent me, and I wanted to pick out some certain words that appear there. This is sort of see as shortfall in resources. So that's an interesting concept, whether it is shortfall. The word uncertainty appears a great deal in what Jake's sent to me so far. The uncertainty in farming and rural communities, and I think we know that there are many, many drivers of this and where that's come from. The new ways word coming out. So we're looking for innovation and where we can change things. Envisioned. So there's a great deal of future thinking about this as well. Questions. How will this be achieved? How can different resource streams work best together? These are some of the things that I've picked up on so far. And I think it was mentioned earlier that there are significant risks as well as opportunities in what we might be looking at. So the whole idea is, try to delve deeper into the systemic nature of all this so we can maybe address this sort of the shortfalls, the uncertainties, the innovation that's needed, the future thinking and the questions, and consider the risks as well. Right now, I always start talking about systems thinking with this picture, which is, to me, an example of systems actually just happening by themselves. And what I want to demonstrate with this is a pattern that is sometimes called a path dependency. This mudflat, first of all, had a little tiny trickle of water flowing across it, which started a channel. As time went on, that channel got deeper and deeper and deeper, and that water has no other alternative route now because that channel exists to flow out to the sea. So we've started with a sort of a blank sheet of mud and ended up with a pattern in it that's very much of a systemic nature. So I use this as a sort of early illustration of patterning that we actually see, and that's part of what we want systems thinking to do, is to identify some of the patterns. So the whole point of systems thinking is to consider the components of a system. their nature, their connections, and their feedbacks. We try then to synthesize all these factors and information we can gather. So there's often a kind of a U-shaped process. We sort of deconstruct what we're looking at, and then we start to go back up the other side of a U-curve to build things together and synthesize the factors to see what is it that emerges when things react and form relationships between each other. Now, the way we actually do this is, as I say, it's best done by a group with very different competencies, and I think we've seen that we're identifying that very nicely with yourselves. On these sort of pictures that we start to build out of this, we can investigate the behavior of the system, and then we can learn more about that behavior. We're very interested in knowing why things happen and find out how those events could then be influenced. I don't use the word change in this context because I think it's very difficult to sort of change a system by just going in there and manipulating things. It's very rare you can do that, but it's the influential processes that we need to look at. This again is another classic picture from systems thinking world. It's called the iceberg, where the visible part is what you see happening today, and it's the events of the world. But we all know that underneath an iceberg, there's another 7/8 worth of ice down there. So we're trying to get down into these deeper levels to find out the patterns of the system's behavior. We want to try to identify the structures underneath that. And the bottom level is the sort of the paradigms, the mental models, the assumptions and the beliefs that the people involved in all this hold. So it really is a process of trying to move down through these different layers and then back up again. Systems thinking has 4 sort of main types, and this is a classification that can be sort of critiqued. There are many other ways of looking at it and breaking it up into different sections, but I find this quite useful. The first type is the objective approach is very hard systems. They're so functional. The second is where we explore the purposes, trying to share different views, seeking consensus is an important part here. And we call this a sort of soft systems approach. The third way is it's labeled emancipatory, but it's essentially about looking at power and control and the coercion that's actually happening within the system, and how influences actually happen. It's a fairly large element of the ethical aspects of systems come into play here. And the fourth level, which is often overlooked a lot, it's about creativity. It's about trying new ideas out. It's using whole new different ways of knowing about things, emotional ways of doing it, sometimes presentational ways, and using all kinds of ideas. We've recently come across a whole group using dance methods to explore systems. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating that might be an approach we use with this today, but I'd be very welcome if somebody wants to dance the ideas. But very quickly, hard system is the physical components. This is the work we did looking at anaerobic digesters, and classically there's fairly structurally stable systems. You can model them quite easily, you can get data, and there's a whole huge discipline called system dynamics modeling, which is really useful for this type of system. So there is that level. If we want to get into certain parts of the system where that is appropriate, there's a huge body of knowledge for how to do that. The soft systems approaches are very much about the human, the abstract ideas mixed in with the physical components. And this is where the messiness of real life actually seems to occur. Structurally unstable, things shift a lot, relationships change, and the whole thing is much more dynamic. It's not easily modeled. Data we can get is patchy, to say the least, and often it is sort of judgmental. So we have a whole batch of methodologies, as we call them, available to address this kind of soft systems approach. The third level is sort of critical systems. It has to deal with the fact that however much we might want to, we can never understand systems completely. And we can never intervene with any kind of certainty in what we're doing. So the whole point is, how on earth do you then work with uncertainty and complexity? And a great deal of it is about looking at who has power to make change, who controls what. It's about being critically aware of what you're doing and taking multiple approaches to actually try things out and learn as you go along. I think it's sometimes called abductive learning. There are many other systems ways which might be appropriate for different occasions. Some that I really like is this positive deviance, positive development idea, where you look for the really good things. And that links to appreciative inquiry approaches too, which again say, what is it that's working well and what can we learn from that, and how can we extend those good practices? And we went all the way down through action research, feminist systems theory and permaculture theory, and it's a branch called systemic failure, which I rather like as well, which looks at how systems actually drift and fail. We can learn a lot from looking at that. What we are going to do with this sort of exercise, starting today and at the next session in Cardiff, is all about holding up pieces of paper that people have scribbled all kinds of things on. Again, this was a very interesting exercise looking at villages in India to try to find out what on earth is happening within them. How do people actually see what they're involved in the systems that they live in? So it's often a very fun exercise, and there's no need to be a great artist. You can scribble and draw all kinds of lovely things on big pieces of paper, as long as you're bringing out some of the ideas and concepts that you find important and you think are necessary to be taken account of. So this is what we call rich pictures, and they are really great starting points for sort of mind mapping what's going on, building influence diagrams, which basically are diagrams which have written down factors, and you link them together and say that influences that. We can move on from that to sort of more formal causal loop diagrams, as we call them, which address that linking and relationships more closely to try to find out what those actually mean. And it is all part of this concept of participatory model building. And I would like to stress that what we end up with often with causal loop diagrams is what I call spaghetti diagram, that doesn't mean anything to anybody else, but is a great tool if you are part of producing it. And it makes a great deal of sense if you've been involved in producing it, but it's not very good at communicating ideas. This is an example of a rich picture I came across, and I love this. I love this one because it's so sort of immediate in a sense. So they're right down there in with the little man at the bottom. That's you, me having a cup of tea, and that's what's happened to get to that cup of tea. All the inputs and yes, oil, forests, water, gas, coal, nuclear power, you name it, everything has been brought into play, and there's a whole set of processes to get a tea bag and the heat and the water into a cup of tea. And then we milk in this picture, but never mind. And then what happens afterwards? Well, we throw it away. We've got all the wrapping and the plastics and the landfill and the rivers and the sewage and etc. So this is what a sort of rich picture can start to look like if you just say, well, what is a cup of tea? What is the system that produces a cup of tea for me? There's an example. I'm not going to go into detail of that because straight away there's an example of how difficult it is to explain what you've dealt with. That's a very simple causal loop diagram, and it will take quite a long time to unravel it and describe to somebody what's going on. But the whole point of the sort of rich picture approach is I end up listening to people and what they draw and how they actually express what they think about the system. We extract factors. And this is it's one of those mysterious processes where we just listen and pick out what it is that they're talking about. That becomes the process of actually drawing these causal loop diagrams. Just to show you why they are important, this is a simple one, which I think I got enough time to talk about. It's where we can actually express the dilemmas that arise in a system. We are all fixed in this dilemma. We have a level of willingness to try new things, but we know the potential benefits on one side, and we know the risks of failure on the other. And, you know, do we have the courage to try that new thing? And you see the sort of links that are fixed in here. That's the blue circular pathway. And there's a kind of reinforcing loop, as we call it, R1 on the left, where the potential benefits reinforce us to try new things. But there's a balancing loop on the right-hand side, which says the risk of failure and encourages us not to try new things. This is an interesting way of actually seeing where you can try to influence this. You can have people to support you in coaching processes to reduce your risk of failure feelings, and you have encouragement from other people to try new things coming in. So you can start to see how a very simple little loop here, which is a dilemma for you, is where you can start to say, well, perhaps we can try something. So we can see what we can influence. And that's where the power of the causal loop diagram starts to come in. So the way to start, I always work with 5 Ps for systems thinking. People, who's involved in this, how are they organized, their perspectives, beliefs, their ideologies, ways of seeing and thinking. Place, environment, and boundaries. It's a very interesting word, boundary. We use it a lot in systems thinking because you have to eventually start to say, well, let's just put the boundary around this, because otherwise you'll start to put in everything forever and you'll never come to an end to it. What is the boundary of our systemic construction that we're looking at today? Processes is a key part of systems thinking. What's going on? What's transformations are happening? What is changing? The 5th P is purpose. What is the system trying to achieve and the reasons for which the system exists? And of course, there is always the 6th P, which is power and control. Who has it? How does it work? So these are some of the approaches we start to take. We start looking at people in the system. We split this into a little acronym I got, OCCAM. Who owns the system? Who are the clients or the beneficiaries? Who is complicit in it? Who enables this system to continue but aren't part of it? Who are the actors? Who is marginalized out of this? For example, from a project looking at agricultural pollution in Wales, we identified sort of 7 major areas of players, and they are sort of those affected by it, the industry itself, the etc., the NGOs, etc. Everybody involved in this has a different history, a different perspective, and they have different agendas. But it starts to help to sort of map them out and collect them and sort of clump them into groups that we can start to feel that you can deal better with the whole group of those things with the similar aims and objectives. perspectives. What are the beliefs and ideologies and ways of seeing things? Another example, recently I did an exercise with a group of PhD students at Cardiff University looking at the demand reduction for water. And we sort of saw people in their homes have a view about what water should be. The people in the water companies have a very different view. The regulators and NGOs come in with concerns about quality, reliability, health, etc. And the marginalized, this was an interesting one that came out, the homeless, would just be nice to have somewhere to wash. So there's a whole set of different perspectives and beliefs around what water demand reduction might mean. So those are the sort of things we try to tease out of looking at the perspectives in this system approach. Place and boundaries. Well, I didn't know quite what to do for this one, except the resource management and funding. There's big overlaps. Both of them have other things to deal with. So this is something we need to sort of really try to tease out of the work in the next couple of sessions, is what are the full boundaries of what we're trying to look at in terms of a systems approach to the problems. The process, what is happening now? Now that's something that then leads on to thinking about what could happen with the existing sources. How can we actually do things a little better without anything else? And then what is the potential? Where could this all go in terms of process? One, I've got down there the word transitions, and Jake and I are very much involved in this. So I think some of what we're doing in another project are looking at the transitional processes that could be really a valuable context for the work at resource management in Wales. Everything at the moment seems to be in transition, but then in a sense, everything always is in transition. Maybe we're facing a period of very rapid change. And it's really important to place the systems thinking we do into that future context. Purpose. We often talk in soft systems methodology of trying to get down to a root definition, a real clear statement of purpose that is the essence of the system. What is it? So we sort of need to look at that sort of understanding the situation of the system, and the transformations that are actually happening. And the fundamental three questions: what, how, and why. The what is the immediate aim of the system. The how is the means of achieving that aim. And the why is the longer term aim of that activity. What is its goal? What's it trying to achieve? Right. I think that is everything for now. I think the idea next is that we sort of have a little bit of sort of questions around that, if anybody's got any, before I sort of hand over to Alice. So I shall stop sharing my screen at that point and ask for any questions. Right.
You've done such a comprehensive job that everybody's
Well, as I say, it was a very quick overview.
Right.
Yeah, to give you some flavour of it. There are many different approaches to it. As I say, there's a whole raft of methodologies that we can apply in different ways of looking at things. So I'd be very interested to get some feedback as to whether this is the approach that is best to sort of start with the rich picture building and try to see if we can, from that, determine the factors involved and the relationships between them. Yeah.
I think you're planning to say a bit later, aren't you? Maybe some of the examples. I think sometimes examples help, don't they, in terms of understanding what the outputs might be, because it's a bit of a mystery otherwise, possibly at the beginning, where you might end up with this. It looks quite complicated. But I find some of the stories of where it's been used in other places, like the Swedish uplands or your diffuse pollution project, but sort of help understand where you might get to with it. So that's something which I think is helpful. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit later. You've got another 10 minutes to.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Okay. So shall we move over on to Alice and to talk about the task in Wales? Yeah.
Thanks, Ian. And that was a really useful overview of systems thinking. It's not an area I know a huge amount about. I hear it mentioned a lot, and how we need to sort of think in a systems way when it comes to nature recovery and biodiversity. So that was really helpful. So I mean, I'm only going to be very brief, just to sort of provide a bit of context about where Welsh Government is at the moment in terms of sort of the additional resource and investment that's needed for nature recovery. So as those on the call will know, despite there being increases in public funding for biodiversity and nature recovery in the last few years, there is still a considerable gap between what we need if we're going to halt biodiversity loss by 2030 and the public funding. And I think that's estimated to be about £5 billion between now and 2030. Ministers, they are very clear and very genuine in their ambition around halting biodiversity loss. They have, it's one of the overarching aims of the government is to tackle the nature emergency. But that's not going to be possible, despite the sort of the ambition, with the scale of funding that we currently have through largely the public sector funding alone, but the sort of the donative incomes and philanthropic giving that others, including those on the call, use as well. So this set off a body of work that we started, with Rachel and Gareth and Karen and a number of others, to look at how we can build a more sustainable delivery model for nature recovery in Wales. There is a strong focus on that in terms of looking at how we can increase the investment into this area, but also recognising that we need to build the capacity and capability on the ground as well. There's no point attracting huge amounts of funding if the capacity there, isn't there in the delivery partners to use that essentially. And I mean delivery partners in the widest possible sense. So the ENGOs, obviously, local authorities, LMPs, the private sector, organisations across the piece really. So we started a piece of work looking at this, looking at what the opportunities are in Wales for investment, to understand where the potential markets are. We've commissioned Finance Earth and partners to provide advice for us on this, because we quickly recognise, or I quickly recognise, certainly in Welsh Government, we don't have this level of expertise, particularly around the sort of the finance aspects. So they are currently sort of holding a contract to provide advice to us that's focusing on a number of different areas. So looking at what capacity and capability we currently have in Wales, and what we need, and recommendations for sort of how to build that capacity. Looking at where the market opportunities are, looking at what the government interventions that are needed to optimise and realise those opportunities, and what the risks there may be with those. And then looking at what potential pilots, although we tend to shy away from the word pilots anymore, but sort of models for payment for ecosystem services that we could use in Wales, as test beds to attract some of this more innovative finance. So that work is ongoing at the moment, and we're due to receive the sort of final report from Finance Earth at the end of March. Simultaneously, the Minister for Climate Change, Julie James, held a deep dive into biodiversity, specifically the 30 by 30 target, over the summer. That group There was a core group that was formed that was then advised by a number of expert groups looking at, say, monitoring and evidence, marine, designated landscapes, and a number of other areas. And a theme running through all of those meetings was the need to attract more investment, that we can't meet the 30 by 30 goal, let alone the wider nature recovery with the levels of funding that we currently have, and that we have to look at other sources of investment, and that the private investment is going to be the key one of those. The deep dive recommendations were published at the beginning of October. There is a specific theme around investment, and a couple of clear recommendations in there that the innovative finance group that I'm leading is taking forward, and the group that Gareth's leading is taking forward as well. I think it's fair to say, as those of you on the call will have heard me say before, there is nervousness at the political level around investment. We are not, it's not an open door here in terms of ministers are as gung-ho maybe as they are in England around private investment. There are a number of concerns. Some of these are kind of more ideological, and some are linked to some of the media reports that we've had over probably the last 6 months or so around private investors buying up land in Wales and using it for tree planting, sort of investing without bringing benefit to local communities and so on. I think that is driven by media reports. I don't think the scale of the problem is actually that big, but it's there's some very effective communicators that are keeping this in the headlines. So the Minister for Climate Change is pretty pragmatic about this. Having heard it consistently through the deep dive, she recognises the role that private investment has to play, but that it has to be high integrity. She wouldn't want investment in Wales that's coming from disreputable sources, greenwashing, those sorts of things. So it's around developing a position and a model that ministers are comfortable with, but that also is going to support the sort of increased scale of delivery that we need. So I'll stop there. I mean, that's just the background. I'll put the link to the deep dive recommendations in the chat for anybody that hasn't seen them.
Thank you, Alice. That's really interesting that quite a lot of different perspectives from different players in this game that are coming into play, and we need to sort of try to tease out what those are and understand the differences and where there are similarities and where people have objectives which are in common. Just approaches might be different. So that's it's an interesting area to look at. Does anybody want to sort of comment at this stage about what we've done so far? And in particular, do you think that a sort of a systems approach might be very valuable to delve into a great deal of what Alice has just described?
If I may, thank you both for very interesting presentations. I was wondering, Alice, we work with quite a few buyers or off-takers of, let's call it, ecosystem services, although this label is not yet used very broadly. And there's certainly a huge amount of interest from investors in investing and supporting projects like this. I was wondering if, given your very clear goal in Wales to stop biodiversity loss by 2030, in addition to kind of monetizing the positive benefits, is there any reflection taking place on penalizing the negative impacts and changing anything in this area?
So could you just say a bit more what you mean about that in terms of penalizing the negative impacts?
The people who have negative impacts on biodiversity more than is currently in place.
So do you mean like more effective enforcement of the legislation?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. That came up time and time again during the deep dive that, we already have a suite of legislation in place that, is designed to prevent some of these impacts from having. And, we can, we're sort of fighting a losing battle in a way. If on the one hand, we're looking to, sort of improve, for example, the protected sites, but we're not preventing the pressures
exactly
on making them get worse. So
you are looking at those jointly.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it, particularly in Wales, will be, related to NRW and the enforcement roles, that they play. So yes, I mean, that is very much part of the parcel. There's also other work that's going on across Welsh Government in other areas to mind. So, for example, the First Minister in the summer launched an action plan to tackle phosphate in rivers. We know that poor water quality obviously has a massive negative impact onto biodiversity. So across Welsh Government, there are other bits of work that are going on to tackle some of those drivers, as well as obviously the overall work that's going on, around net zero, climate change being one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss. So, there is that. I mean, I come at this from the sort of the biodiversity perspective, but across Welsh Government, there's a whole range of work going on. But effective enforcement has got to be a critical part of that, because what message does it send otherwise, for those who are polluting waterways and other things, it's not exactly, it's not sort of making them change their ways, is it, if there isn't that effective enforcement?
Super, thank you for confirming that.
Okay.
But I think the important part of that debate is around what we call this regulatory baseline, because we can't get investors into the market, because investors won't pay to clear up pollution. They want to pay for the added value, so the sequestering of carbon. However, it's a really complex picture in Wales at the moment, because there is a lot of change across the board, brought by the economic crisis that we have from COVID, from Brexit, etc. And I think what's going to be quite critical to this work in Wales is bringing all partners on this journey. And I think that's a hurdle we have to overcome at the moment, because everyone, for example, talks about the sustainable farming scheme being kind of some sort of panacea about some sort of result to this. I do want it to be, and I can see in the future it being, but it doesn't come in till 2025, isn't fully effective till 2030. And I still don't understand how we get the money to the only people on land, because I'm very aware, Gareth, and I'm also involved in the marine work. The only people who can achieve nature's recovery are farmers. And until we can enable this investment coming in and enable that to go to farmers to do the job that we're all calling on them to do, to make their livelihood sustainable, to make it worthwhile for them, to make it attractive for the next generation. And I think that's the nub of this, because being involved in peatland restoration, for example, and we can very rapidly do that in the Plynimon project on our own private land, etc. But how do we, there's only so much of that we can do. And we've just set an ambition in Wales to restore half the peatlands in Wales, 45,000 hectares. A lot of that will be privately owned by farmers. And how do we equate that investment into them? Because again, the contract length is way too long. People are not going to lock themselves into huge contract lengths. So there's some key kind of fundamental barriers, and behind that is all this system stuff and culture and resistance to change, ability to change, and everyone's on a different journey. But until we can start answering some of these critical things, like, do we have a system that we think will definitely work, and we can definitely get this investment and it be equitable and enable the right types of behaviours and make sure life for farmers or fishers is sustainable. And that's the nub of it at the moment. The regulatory floor, I think, will get into place. It's problematic because it causes concerns and clashes as we go along that journey. But that has to be in place, otherwise we won't get the investment coming in.
Thank you, Rachel. I think we'll just carry on with this, I think. Karen, you have your hand up for a question there. Or a comment, yeah.
Sorry, my buttons react really slowly. Yeah, so I was also reflecting. Gareth's got his hand up as well, so we might be on the similar wavelength. But I was also reflecting on the importance of the people aspect of it. So sort of following on from that, from what Rachel was saying there about farmers, it's an important aspect of the work we've been trying to do with our marine resilience type work, the Coast and Seas Partnership, is this understanding the motivations and the sort of grassroots stakeholders underneath it. Alice talked about sort of empowering our organisations, but at the bottom, not the bottom, at the heart of all of that is what are people actually thinking? How is this going to work? We need everybody to be sort of bought in and understanding in the same system. How do we get to that? You know, how do we unpick that information? We've been looking at capacity building in coastal communities, but I think we're sort of opening the door for people to apply for funding to try and unpick some of that. But I don't think we really know what we're going to get, or you know how that's going to work, which is one way of approaching it. Let's see what happens. But I think that the unpicking that people and perspectives would be probably quite helpful for us in sort of getting to the bottom of some of the. There are some real resistance within the communities for sort of change and looking at different diversification options and that sort of thing.
Great. Thank you, Karen, for that observation. Gareth, you'd like to comment? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of these really tricky things, isn't it? When everyone said, I'm trying to put together how on earth we do something similar on the sea. Of course, it's not separate to the land, so there'll be elements there. But I think that systems element is going to be really important to bring people with us. If we don't do the sort of, you know, the what's in it for me and actually what's in it for the rest of us if you contribute to this. So that, I mean, London's a good example. There was the SCAMP project over in Northern Ireland, did something similar. And it actually got people to sit down and talk to each other about, this is what the issue is, this is how it will impact you, but actually this is how you can impact that. I do wonder, I mean, I know we said we don't call it pilot projects anymore, but I keep defaulting that because it's the language I always use. I think we need to get some tangible things underway, because one of the criticisms we often get, and I get it personally, is it's a lot of talk, but what does that actually look like in practice? And I think in the marine environment, there's, you know, the fishing industry have stepped back from a lot of the engagement because they feel like everything's a threat at the moment. Catching up with them later on this. So how do we sort of show that not everything is a threat, or if it is a threat, not everything is a negative outcome? And that's going to be really tricky, but really key to this. And if anyone hasn't said it already, Wales is a small country. You know, small, medium enterprises that are kind of independent. And we've got, as Karen was talking to, the communities element. So Future Generations Act is about staying on communities, businesses and environment. Those things need to connect to each other. But we can't have one champion the other too much, otherwise the other sectors get upset. But at the same time, as Alice just said, biodiversity is in massive decline. We need to halt that. And that's the sort of the level of ambition. And that's not a criticism, because I don't think we can restore it in the time period we've got. But halting it's a massive challenge. That means something else has got to give. And that's a really hard pill to swallow for people. So yeah, mapping this out is going to be a very big, messy, complicated image. Yeah. For these people. I'll stop talking now, otherwise I'll just keep rambling.
Thank you, Gareth. I think you're right. It's a massive challenge to map this out, indeed. Gwa, you have a comment? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I know that obviously I'm here representing the NFU and the farmers in Wales, really, and just probably an observation for me that we mentioned that farmers are key to a lot of this, being on the ground, as it were. But morale at the moment in agriculture, I would say, is at an all-time low, just because of the amount of pressure at the moment. You know, it seems to be one thing after another in quick succession. I know the industry is quite resilient, but it's just the amount of things coming their way at the moment, which is is phenomenal, really. Between this, fertilizer, economic crisis, COVID, egg production at the moment. So yeah, in terms of communicating these things, it's a hard sell. It's difficult. It's just difficult. That's what I don't claim to say that I have the answer. I think all farms would understand the need for biodiversity and nature. Everybody who lives on a farm lives in nature, and they probably know, they know their landscape very well and how it's changed over the years. But yeah, I just want to make that comment, really, that it is very hard at the moment, and the level of uncertainty, I think, in the industry is not helping either, I guess. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now, but yeah, I just wanted to highlight the level, the morale level at the moment, just from my experience, really.
Thank you. That's really interesting, because it does bring in this almost this emotional aspect of systems as well, which I think we need to bear in mind all the time, that people may be able to influence, but where's that influence coming from? What are you trying to address? And morale is extraordinarily important in systems. Alice, I think you're next. Yeah.
Thanks. I wanted to come in on the point about needing to engage, the wider communities and a wider audience, because I think sometimes, we collectively, people on this call and others, we're talking to the converted. We know. Oh, sorry, my camera's frozen again. We know what needs to happen, but we need to engage that wider range of people. So I was at the SNCB event in London earlier this week. Fantastic energy in the room about what we need to do in terms of nature recovery and all the actions that are needed. But we're in danger of just talking amongst ourselves, or those people that were, in the room, some very, sort of high level people there, the DEFRA permanent secretary and the chairs of all the SNCBs and so on. If we don't take that conversation outside of the room, outside of those that we normally speak to, we're never going to have that sort of systems change that we need, because it's something the Minister talks about a lot, needing that Team Wales approach. So absolutely, the bulk of the work that will need to be done, particularly in terms of the delivery on the ground, will be government and NGOs and public bodies and farmers and so on. But we need to drive that wider behaviour change, so that us as individuals are also aware of the actions that we need to take. Otherwise, we're only going to scratch the surface here, and that's my concern, is how do we do that? How do we do that in an effective way, so that we take this conversation to those people that they enjoy their walks in nature, they enjoy the marine environment, they enjoy whatever they do, but they're not really sure about what they as an individual can do.
Right. Thank you, Alice. I think that's absolutely right there. It's often very sobering to actually go out and find out what's really happening at the sort of literally in terms of farming, the grassroots, and actually get your feet muddy and dirty and understand from those involved in it what their issues and problems are. So that's a key part to that. Rachel, you have something.
Yeah. I think, Alice, you make a good point about the echo chamber, and we have to get this out of this space. And I think part of the problem is that you can't, if anyone knows anything about farming at the moment, I've never seen it in such a, I wouldn't say crisis, but we've got coming out of common agricultural policy, we've got the trade agreement with Australia lurking in the background, phasing over 5 years. Avian bird flu playing havoc with the poultry industry at the moment, and that's all on the back end of almost 30% price increases. Numbers of farmers going consistently down in Wales. So if you look, I always look at CAP and think it was a huge. In some ways, it didn't work, because it hasn't worked socially, because numbers of farmers are going down, so people aren't staying in the industry. It's not worked enough in terms of the environment, because across sectors we've seen the decline, and it's not working. If it's not working socially, it's not working culturally for us in Wales. So, and the economics of it, I think the average earnings are about 30,000 for a Welsh farmer, and you double that if you're a dairy farmer. So the push is always into the intensive. If you know, so you're basically being told a constant story, but then you got to get to your eyeballs in debt to become an intensive farmer. So what type of future is that? And I think the narrative for me is actually, this is the narrative. This is the new money. I think if we term this as a way of getting nature, then people are going to be, look, I've got enough going on. Thank you very much. You're now asking me also to deliver across carbon, nature, stopping flooding. You know, you're asking me to do all these things. The thing is if the message is the new money, the way you make a sustainable living is this, and food will still be part of it. You'll still be farming and a farmer, and that food, we want to increase the recognition of it and hopefully get a lot more of that actually consumed in Wales, and engage communities and get more people involved with food. And I think that's the shift for me. The shift is this is just seen as nature conservation bodies wanting to buy land and chuck people off the land and just do their lovely nature thing on the land. Then people are going to be quite rightly very negative about it. And this is what I mean. The problem we have at the moment are people coming in asking us to carbon offset for them, and the only way we can do it is if we buy land, because you've got to enter into a 100-year contract. And actually we don't want to buy land. I want to give that money to farmers for them to do, as you're quite rightly, they know the land, they know what with it. So I think that's the key dialogue at the moment that's missing. And I think and if I'm to be really honest, I think the problem is it's just too difficult at the moment for farming representation to really, and the Nature Friendly Farming Network are being really brave in this space, I think. And I think we need to enable that, and also do likewise with communities, get them to fully understand what this concept is about, because at the moment it's either people grabbing money, grabbing land, and not involving communities, and everybody's just switching off this agenda very rapidly. But I actually think it's a key economic driver in Wales going forward, and it's not seen in that space.
Thank you, Rachel. That's really interesting, because this sort of addresses that sort of dilemma between sustainability issues and resilience issues. And very much what you said there was about the resilience of the farming communities, that we need to really focus on as much as we do on the sustainability and the biodiversity issues. So that's interesting thing there. Barbara,
I had just a very quick remark. Rachel, you mentioned earlier the importance of regulatory baselines, and what I would advocate is bringing in the buyers or the off-takers of ecosystem services, as well as the investors, into the projects and discussions on shaping those pilots as early as possible. Because I feel from working with different local authorities across the country that there is this expectation that there is this very homogeneous group of investors who will all kind of follow specific models and invest in specific models with their capital. There are not. So I think it's really, really helpful. The moment you've got the baseline, you know what your kind of ecosystem potential is for those projects, to really bring the people both who will pay you for those and who will invest in those very, very early on. Because otherwise, unfortunately, the system might need to be quite dramatically redesigned to meet those financial objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Jake?
Yeah, just listening to the point about needing to bring people together to sort of generate a collective sort of story about what this is about, and the potential of it seems to keep on striking me. And that's again sort of backed up from what Barbara just said from the investor end. So we got it from both ends really, and that's actually been key to how we've been trying to approach this. And again, I'm hopeful that this gives us a starting point for that, because one of the powerful things that has attracted me to the systems thinking approaches is that and one of the stories which kind of struck me is that they have the ability of becoming a sort of shared object or a shared platform, where people with different perspectives, including those people who quite often feel left out and not listened to, can kind of share their unique understandings of the system, and together get a shared understanding of what the system is and what it could be. So obviously we can only do that at a small scale to start off with, but having explored that and articulated it might put us in a better position then to go out and have these broader conversations that, you know, Alice and others were talking about, with bigger groups of stakeholders, and particularly given that, we've got representatives of much bigger groups involved, then those will hopefully move out from them. So yeah, it just sort of reinforces what I was hoping this might do. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Jake. The original plan when we put this together was to sort of have a couple of breakout sessions, but given that we are sort of 8-9 people, I think sticking it in one big group is absolutely works fine. What we were after was to sort of trying to tease out at this very early stage what are some of the big issues, and I think the discussion we've had so far has identified quite a few of those. And also the other question we were looking at is who should be involved in this whole process of trying to understand what's going on, and who should be part of it, and who is, the altogether involved, who are all the players in this. So
sorry to jump in, Ian, just to say we've had somebody additional join us. I think it's Adam Kennelly, and from Development Trust Association Wales, and I just wondered if you wanted to say anything, Adam, before we moved on from the kind of talking about some of the big issues to talking about the stakeholders.
Good morning, and I suppose the first thing I want to say is my real apologies for joining so late. I wanted to join and listen. My current role is Development Trust Association Wales, but obviously I'm here largely for a background in landscape management, alternative finance, and some pilot work around ecosystem payment services. So I'm very happy to listen in, and I hope to join you in the in-person meeting next week. And I picked up the conversation from when Rachel was talking, and found myself arriving in the meeting and nodding, saying, "Yep, there's a perception issue, and there's a positioning issue, and wherever we go with this, make sure we start up on that right foot of needing a collaboration with the farmers, as opposed to what often gets portrayed as them and us. We want to buy the land, and if we don't, we want to see the shared outputs arrive." So no, those are my comments. I'll happily listen and join in the later conversation, but apologies that I missed the first major chunk. I suppose my final point is really pleased to see this conversation taking place.
Thank you, Adam. Okay. So for the next just a few minutes, really, just ask if you would like to sort of bring forward any other big issues that this process should be focusing on, and in a way trying to identify all the people and players, etc., is something that I hope will just emerge from the process next week. But if you think you know of any player that hasn't really had much involvement yet but should be, it'd be really useful if you could sort of send those through, maybe put them in the chat now, or just email them through later. So that process of trying to tease out the full set of players, I think something is something you can't do suddenly and quickly. It will come out over the next couple of sessions we deal with. So the question now for the next few couple of minutes really is just, are there any other big issues that this sort of process should be addressing? Yes, yeah.
It's not an issue. I was going to ask, actually, right back at the beginning, we talked about drawing lines around things. I think that's really sensible, because otherwise we end up saying like each and all, everyone in Wales all at once. But in your experience, if we sort of draw a line around, let's just for example say farming, and then water quality, and then fishing, there's three distinct things. At what point do you bring those back together? Because they're all interlinked in one way or another. But how do you do that in a meaningful way rather than just trying to budget?
It's a really interesting question, because it does help to sort of keep things quite contained. Otherwise, you end up trying to look at maps which are so complex and elaborate that you can't see the wood for the trees. So often it's a question of looking at individual sort of boundaries and then stepping up a level to look at how those bigger clumps all interact with each other. It's sort of borrowing ideas from organizational development, where we often look at breaking things into those sort of lower level categories and then looking at how they connect and communicate between them. It's not easy, and you end up going up and down all the time. So it's a classic model of the sort of lower level, the meso level, and the macro level of looking at it. Yeah, and I think that's very much the nature of this kind of work, where you've got literally hundreds of players. I don't mean just people, I mean literally hundreds of agencies, etc., involved in this, and you've got such a diverse set of problems and issues interrelated. This is not an easy process, and that sort of leads me on to sort of the next sort of stage. I wasn't imagining we would get a nice clear list of issues coming out of today. I expected literally to have a sort of a blank piece of paper still at the end of the day as to what all the important issues might be, but we will analyze what we've come out with. Now I'll just sort of share my screen again to sort of give you a little bit of the next little bit. Yes, my blank piece of paper. That's the next stage. We start literally with nothing. We don't know where we are. Certainly I don't, because this is fairly new to me, although I will admit to doing a study for Natural Resource Wales on agricultural pollution, and that was really eye-opening for me. That I did draw quite a few causal loop diagrams out of that, and the real problems, the underlying problems, were not the ones you might have imagined right from the beginning. So just a little bit of some of the challenges in using systems thinking is that we're trying to do it obviously in a very limited time. We want answers now. People are changing all the time, and we're now doing things a great deal more over distance. Systems thinking grew up a lot in organizational design and management, where everybody was in the same building sometimes, and it was very easy to do things. But now we have to live with this distance and the fact that we don't actually meet physically that often. We also have this problem of it's people higher up the pecking order, you might call it. They have little time to get involved in this kind of work, try to understand the systems. Yet they're the ones who make the changes, to make the decisions. We also have to very often try to get away from this idea that there are simple cause and effects and immediate fixes. There are no silver bullets, and there's no panacea for anything at all. What we find with this kind of approach is that things emerge out of that blank piece of paper. And change happens, and you can never really understand why or how it occurred. And part of the problem also is that we do come with a lot of baggage around ideas and complex language, which it'd be great if everybody we dealt with was had been studying systems thinking for decades, and we might get somewhere. But actually, when you do put a lot of people who've done systems thinking for decades together, you end up with an awful mess of conflicting ideas, because there's no clear picture forwards. So is this a useful approach is the question. I mean, it's fundamental to what we're going forward, really. The next step would be to sort of think about these issues and this kind of approach to things, just let your subconscious work on it. And then the next stage would be to do face-to-face with the flip chart, because that's one of the main tools of this trade is the flip chart paper and pens and people sitting around and sketching it out and trying to get that rich picture going, some kind of initial mapping. Out of that, we go away in a huddle and we extract from that as much as we possibly can to document it and put it into some form that people can then comment on, add to clarifications into it, etc. And then we go around again, we find that mapping and see what we can do with it. So those are the ways forward. In terms of the sort of way things change, the experience that I had of the agricultural pollution problem was very much around getting a lot of people in the room. It was organised by Natural Resource Wales, but it was part of the Wales Land Management Forum, as a subgroup of that. And it involved me spending quite a lot of time out in the field, literally visiting farms and meeting with farmers in their groups, where they were addressing what was, to a certain extent, quite a contained problem compared to what you're looking at now with your sort of management, which is the overloading of the water systems and the land with phosphates and nitrates and other fertilizers, things like that, and the consequent problems that are faced by everybody involved in that, with the water companies, nature conservation and fisheries and etc., even marine aspects of that as well. So it was a complex system. The interesting thing was that for me, one of the most key things was the way that the media and public opinion seemed to have a tremendous influence on the process of trying to address these problems. And in a way, the whole reason for the Land Management Forum to be set up was to sort of have some effect on that appearance of the problem. And what they found was, well, my impression was that this was an extremely valuable forum because it was actually doing the job of addressing the real issues, although it was really set up in order to look at that media public opinion pressure that government faces. So that's, for me, an experience where I had no preconception as to what would come out of it. There was no hard system solution. There was no way of saying that you could model this and dial the knobs easily to change what was going on. A lot of it was about behavior, and a lot of it was about perceptions and the way people could cooperate and work together. So that's me, Jake. I think maybe over to you to sort of talk about the next steps, where we go. Yeah, you're muted, Jake. Yeah.
I thought I'd unmuted myself, but I didn't. But thank you, Ian, and thank you everybody else. That was a really interesting discussion, and yeah, Ian's right that we got fairly quickly to some of the key issues, which is helpful to start off with. So yeah, in terms of, I think I'll just say, yeah, what the next steps are, what we're doing next, and as Ian says, if you want to. We ran out of time in terms of talking about the stakeholders, people and groups who should be involved and who might be slightly not involved in the conversation at the moment. Any thoughts on that? Please post them in the chat or email them or bring them along next week, because hopefully some of you will be there. I know some of you are going to be there, but I know some of you can't make it. So yes, thank you. Interesting, productive. So it's next Thursday, the 1st. We're meeting face to face in Cardiff. I haven't sent you all the details of where, but but I've now finally got somewhere, and I'll be emailing that out hopefully today. The address it's a 15-minute walk or so from the station, Cardiff Central, and then we will follow that with a third online workshop, which hopefully people can attend as well. I'll send round a link to this recording if that seems like technically feasible, so people can look at it again. And if you don't mind, I'll send it around to people who haven't been able to make the session today, so they've got particularly Ian's piece. But I think it'd be interesting if nobody objects to have the whole thing, because you covered a lot of the key issues. That's it really. So thank you, and hope to see as many of you as possible next week, and or at the third workshop, which I haven't set a date for yet, but I was waiting to see basically what people felt next week about when to do that. And yeah, I think I'm very hopeful that this will be really useful, and that was a really good start, so thank you. I think Karen wanted to say something as well.
Thanks, Jake. So I might have missed it because my internet dropped for a few minutes there just before Ian's second set of slides, but it was just so we've obviously come in late to this process to understand it, and just wondering whether next week's session, I think it would be very useful to come and observe, but appreciating that you sort of started from a terrestrial basis, do you think sort of adding the marine environment into that is going to be possible, or I could just come and observe? Is there any more detail about what's going to happen next week that we can fit into?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Thank you. Yeah, because it's notable that there's quite a lot of marine around today, which is something, as you say, I didn't start off with because we've been working on land, but it's all part and parcel of the same challenge. So I think certainly it'd be really great to have you along if you wanted to come. We will have to have a discussion at some point, as Ian says, about where we boundary this, but it's not impossible that we could, quite often it makes sense to, you might want to split things up to start off with before looking at the links between them. So when you're doing the initial mapping, that can sometimes be part of the process. So it wouldn't hurt to have a group thinking about marine and another group thinking about farming, and then looking at the links and commonalities and differences between them, because the overarching challenge of the need to resource change, or change the way in which our resources are directed, and what outcomes they come up with, is obviously true across the piece, isn't it? So yeah, please do come along. And I think our focus will be on where we started, but there's no reason why we can't carry on use the same methods at the same time to look at marine and the links, and that quite often might throw up other interesting things that we hadn't thought of as well, so inevitably.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. I think
that's good. That's good for us, but just don't want to sort of muscle in on something. But that sounds very useful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. No, thanks for coming. It's great to have you.
Great. Thank you, Jake. I think interesting thoughts there were that the same kind of developments and shifts and the scenarios for the future that we're looking for sort of land and farming will apply to the marine environment as well. I think it's extremely important that we do focus a lot on the future and where things are moving towards, because it's often the case you try to fix the system today without realizing that it's not going to be that system in 10 years time or 20 years time. So adding that element of sort of what you might call a future studies and foresight into this whole process is going to be incredibly important, I feel. Yeah. Right. So thank you, everybody, and I'll just leave Jake to say the last word. Thank you.
I think the the last word is thank you. And got off of it. I'm just checking in the chat. There's nothing that I need to address. Adam asked about this idea of a sort of a Welsh sort of network to be working on this, and that's something which has sort of come up repeatedly. I know, and I think something that is worth talking about, because clearly a lot of this work needs to be done collectively at a larger than project scale, and obviously there is work that's going on in that space. Alice mentioned quite a lot of it, and there's just a question about whether there's any value to another forum for working together on this, and there may or may not be. From the Ecosystem Knowledge Network, they've got some funding to I think the Mersey Fairbairn Foundation to look at whether there's need in Wales and I think also Northern Ireland for this. And so we've been talking for a while and hoping to run a conference or a get together in probably the spring next year. It's looking like now. It's taken a while to get to this point, where we will be bringing people together again to talk about this, many different perspectives, and also explicitly to talk about, you know, whether there's any value in a different, you know, platform or forum that we can work together on this on, or whether that makes no sense, and, you know, we've already got what we need or what. But yeah, so that's happening. That's probably worth mentioning in the background. And you know, there is a sort of some whiff of a promise of funding for that. Not definite, but yeah, we're going to start off with an event next year, and see what people's feelings are about taking that forwards, and what the best way of doing that is. So yeah, thank you very much, and finishing off spot on time. So yeah, involvement's really appreciated, and you know, this doesn't work without people being involved. And I know it's kind of a bit of a gamble because everybody's got their day job and loads of stuff to do and too much stuff to do. But I really believe that that putting some effort into this will reap dividends. And so I'm hoping to prove that through this process of these 3 workshops, and then if there is legs in it, go further, get some more funding, get more people involved, and do it. You know, take it further. But thank you, and yeah, it wouldn't happen without you lot. So thanks very much for turning up, and hopefully see you next week.
Thank you. See you next week.
Take care.